we come into Washington, and I'm sitting in one of the front rows, and I look down, and there's Henry Kissinger a number of seats down. So I slid out, went up to the projection room where Mark Berger, who mixed the film, was, and I said, turn the sound up. I want to see, when that rumbling starts, I want to see those chins of Kissinger.
Happy Veterans Day. How many veterans do I have in the building this evening? Thank you for your service. As you know, we are a veteran service organization. We have a 100-year history of service and dedication to the community, state, and nation, and especially that dedication to the Hollywood community. Thank you for being here with us. We are so thrilled to be premiering a beautiful, beautiful film and to share an experience with such a special night for us all. I'm so pleased to introduce Alan Rohde, one of our members and a Navy veteran who will be hosting this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commander. I would like to welcome all of you on behalf of Post 43 and the American Cinematheque. This is a partnership between the two of us. And, well, first off, look at this theater. Isn't this theater gorgeous? It is really a privilege. So I'd like to thank the Commander, Bill Steele, and the whole Post 43 team. And I especially like to thank the American Cinematheque, General Manager Dennis Bartok, Lynn DeGleese, Grant Moniger, and the whole team of volunteers. This is really a really good situation for everyone, but particularly me, because I've been working with the American Cinematheque for almost 20 years now, mic drop, and now I'm a member of Post 43, so to crib from Humphrey Bogart, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship and a beautiful partnership. And the other thing that makes this so special is this is the 100th anniversary today of Veterans Day. I mean, think about that. This was President Wilson declared Armistice Day in 1919, which became Veterans Day. And I think it's just wonderful that we're all here. And there is no movie that I can think about that is more appropriate to celebrate this date than The Right Stuff. It is just it is an American cinematic epic. And as far as I'm concerned, it's in the line of work going back to D.W. Griffith, C.B. DeMille, Spielberg, take your pick. But I could stand here and wax philosophical and talk about how, you know, as a baby boomer, I gave up my Davy Crockett coonskin cap for my Alan Shepard trading card and all that. I don't think you want to hear that. I think what you want to do is you want to hear about this great movie from our special guest. And our special guest, very briefly, I think eclectic is an inadequate word to describe his work, from the University of Chicago, Harvard Law School, to a mailman in California, a teacher. He lived abroad in Europe. His first film, Goldstein, in 1964, that was shot in Chicago, his hometown, basically on the street for little money, won the Critics' Prize at the Cannes Film Festival, and the films are unique in their diversity and excellence. The Great Northfield, Minnesota Raid. His writing, he wrote a little ditty that was called Raiders of the Lost Ark. Anybody hear of that? He outlawed Josie Wales. And then, got a Western crowd in here. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The Wanderers. The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Henry and June. He has been compared, rightfully so, I think, to John Huston. He is the director, writer of The Right Stuff, and he's one of Hollywood's greatest directors. The auteurs auteur. Please welcome the one and only Mr. Philip Kaufman.
Thank you, Alan. It's so nice of you. Appreciate it. Thanks for that nice introduction. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a shout out to a few people. One of whom is a man with The Right Stuff who helped me set up the deal for this film, and I want to wish a man with the right stuff, Barry Hirsch, happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Barry.
In attendance tonight is, in my mind, one of the greatest actresses in Hollywood, who plays Betty Grissom in this movie, Veronica Cartwright. She was also in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and I always thought I'd try to make every movie with Veronica. She's such a good actress. And Jacqueline West is here, who great costume director, worked with her a number of times, Oscar nominated for many films. The film was shown recently at the Telluride Film Festival, and it was a great screening because it was done outdoors, up in the mountains.
Right.
Telluride, under the stars, and I introduced it. And as I looked up, I could sort of feel and see, and I mentioned to the audience that, you know, those shooting stars up there, Tom Wolfe was there, Sam Shepard, Lee Von Helm, and many others, especially Robert Chardoff, who produced this film, was with me throughout the entire film, one of the greatest Hollywood producers, truly. Chardoff and Winkler were partners. Bob Chardoff was on the set all the time, always coming up with good ideas and suggestions. And his wife Jenny is here tonight, and his son Billy is in attendance too. So
we're having a Right Stuff reunion.
Yeah, it's a Right Stuff reunion here.
That's great.
And anyway, thank you. I appreciate that.
Phil, it is so special having you here again. Well, just to start, what drew you to this, and how did you get involved to make The Right Stuff?
Well, I don't know, it's a long story in a way. I read the book.
Right.
Tom Wolfe wrote a fantastic book. He was a great writer. If you haven't read the book, just read it. It's a book of so much energy and humor and insight. The research was phenomenal, and it was enthralling. And for some reason, at one point, Bob Chardoff and Erwin Winkler asked me if I would be interested in making it. I had some discussions with an old friend of mine, William Goldman, who had written an earlier script. I felt that his script left out the crucial element,
With Chuck Yeager and
which was The Right Stuff.
Right.
I mean, he was doing a sort of a patriotic film about the astronauts. It was the time of the hostage thing in Iran. He wanted to do a patriotic movie, but I said, no, there's a greater movie here about America, and there are things that can be part of patriotism but can transcend patriotism, and it's a spirit that, I mean, I'm sure it exists everywhere, but there's a particularly American spirit that, you know, not only came out of the military, out of American Westerns, out of my life in Chicago right after the war, on the streets where guys had a code of honor, and they behaved in a way without bragging. They did the task, and there was something great about it.
It's very much, the Wolf book is almost kind of like two books.
Yeah.
And how you were able to meld it together so well. And talk a little bit about Chuck Yeager, because I think people tend to associate him with, well, he broke the sound barrier and he did Delco spark plug commercials in the 80s and all of that stuff. But I mean, this was a guy that shot down 4 planes in a single day when he was 22.
No,
he was
called
he was the ace of aces, I guess.
Yeah, no. Well, when the project came to me, the idea was that Yeager really didn't want anything to do with it. He didn't know if, you know, maybe the book didn't quite hit him right because it went on and talked about. He was a guy who said what he wanted to say and then could go out in the wilderness backpacking.
Right.
He was, you know, he was a feisty guy who said, as I say, said what he wanted to say. Somehow I got to meet him and we hit it off. He agreed to be sort of an advisor to the movie. The problem came, one of the first problems was when I cast Sam Shepard, who I couldn't find a Yeager. I just couldn't find anyone.
Yeah, one thing that really impressed me is that, did you get any pressure to load this up with Robert Redford and Paul Newman and the movie star thing?
A little of that.
Yeah.
But fortunately, Bob Chardoff and Erwin Winkler wanted to make the best possible movie. And there was, when we came to the Lad Company, there was a man named Gareth Wigan, who since passed, who's English, who just wanted to make a movie with the best people possible. And so I had support in that way.
Yeah. That's sometimes unusual.
No, it could have been. I mean, now a lot of these guys sort of become stars at Harris, Dennis Quaid, all of these guys.
But then there were actors, and I think it was in your script, Sam Shepard, you saw him as Yeager, and here is a guy that really loathed the star publicity, was a playwright and everything, and I think you wrote that kind of like Gary Cooper, but more like John Garfield, which I thought was pressing as hell.
A leather jacket on, but Sam Shepard was Gary Cooper in a way, and he shared a quality with Yeager of not wanting to make a fuss about these things. He really, you did a job. He was a playwright. I first saw him reading poetry in North Beach in Chicago, in San Francisco. And my wife Rose, she said, "There's your guy." And I said, "Where?" Right up there. I said, "Sam, he's a foot taller than Yeager." She said, "He's your man. He's your man." So I met Sam and I said, "Sam, I'm doing the right stuff. Would you like to be in it?" And he said, "No." Sam didn't even like flying, even though his father had been in the military and so forth. But I pursued Sam and slipped a script under his door.
You wooed him.
I wooed him and slipped the script under his door, and the next morning he knocked on my door and said, "Let's have a talk." Well, Sam you know, Sam had never met Yeager, and we had a meeting where I was going to introduce them, show them the story, done extensive storyboards on the film, and the special effects house had all of these storyboards. And Yeager showed up and was looking at the pictures and thinking how we were going to do it. And Sam was nowhere to be found. And about a half hour later, Sam comes in like a tall country guy, unshaven, late. They look at each other. Yeager calls me over. He says, "That ain't me." And I said, and Sam was not, Sam was just Sam.
Right.
So I started getting them together, the director's job to get these two guys together. And as I started talking, Sam said, sorry, I was late, my pickup truck didn't start right away. Chuck said, "What kind of truck you got?" And we looked out the window, and Sam had this old pickup truck, and they started talking about that, and then they started talking about things that they had in common, and pretty soon it was like Chuck Yeager became the father that Sam wrote about in all his plays that he ever had. And
Bonding over a pickup.
yeah, well, it was one thing led
Sure,
to
that's
another,
right.
and I realized that they had everything in common, and they became great friends. And Chuck, for all his reputation for being ornery, was just a great friend. He was hung around the movie. He's even in the movie. You'll see him as a cameo in a bar scene, playing sort of a guy who just hangs around the bar and serves drinks. You'll recognize Yeager. But and when we would drive to the set up in the high desert, Yeager never went over 55 miles an hour because it was much more dangerous for him on the highways of California than
It was up in the...
than challenging all the demons that lived in the
And
air.
I think I read Shepard was fearful of flying and didn't want to fly
He
at
didn't
all.
want to fly, but
He didn't want
Yeager took him up, and they flew together.
Oh, okay.
And Yeager took me up. We were flying over the high desert, and he just wanted to test me. And so as we were flying in the Beechcraft, he turned off the engine and gave me the controls. But I knew this guy, he was charmed. And I just said, Chuck, whenever you're ready to turn the motor on, let's go. Which way do you want me to steer? And I saw Chuck afterwards. We had some fun together. We hung out in bars in Chicago, in San Francisco, Tosca bar, and then
I've been at Tosca's.
yeah, and then 20 years later, when we had a 20th anniversary at the Egyptian, both Chuck and Gordon Cooper showed up. One of Gordon Cooper died shortly thereafter, and after the screening, they both stood in front of the audience and just said how much they liked the movie. They were
That's
so nice.
The
about
ultimate
that.
compliment.
Yeah,
How about
so-
casting the other actors as the astronauts? How did that work?
So there's Sam Shepard, who reluctantly came in, and he said, I worked with some great actors. There's a guy named Ed Harris that worked at the Magic Theater, Fred Ward, and they came in, and there was Ed Harris. He was John Glenn. I always said, if John Glenn had been Ed Harris, he would have been president.
That's probably true.
Yeah. And Fred Ward was, they were part of the Magic Theater. They were theater actors. They were, Ed Harris was painting houses, and, they all had little parts in films. Dennis Quaid was, a young actor. He'd done a couple of movies, but, so many of these people. I'd worked with Veronica Cartwright, Jeff Goldblum on other films, but, and then Kim Stanley, who was a legend, legendary actress, became Poncho, and we we were together all the time, in bars. I could always check with my friend Jeanette, who owned the bar, who was sort of like Pancho, 3 in the morning, who punched and they played pool and,
Man, the next morning's production report.
Oh, yeah. And the guys who were Navy pilots hated the Marine pilots. I mean, they were all, but they lived in their roles, and they were very tough guys. And they inhabited the roles, and they, believed in the story they were telling. And I had a great cinematographer, Caleb Deschanel, who's one of the greats. And Caleb and I, we scouted everywhere, Cape Canaveral and everywhere. But
The complexity of the film, I recently did an interview with Richard Fleischer, the director's son, and he referred to his father on the set as kind of a general, the Iron Butterfly. This was, I think, way bigger than something you'd done before. What was your technique for managing all of the myriad things a director has to do on a picture of this scope?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't see myself in a way as an old school director like that.
Curtiz.
Curtiz, a great book by Michael Curtiz that you wrote. I don't know, I grew up on the streets. I played quarterback and shortstop on our teams, and there was a way of, and I grew up going to movies, and in some ways, I knew what I wanted, but I loved to be an audience. I loved to watch my actors. I loved to encourage them to amuse me, to entertain me, and it's amazing how the great actors respond to that. I mean, they have to know that you know what you're doing, but you can cut them off too soon if you're too authoritarian, and they can't develop their roles. They can't develop things. Some of these actors at Harris and so forth come out of sort of method acting and
group theater or something.
Group theater,
yeah.
and you just want to get the best out of them. And there's nothing that actors respect more than somebody who gets the best out of, or allows them to push the envelope of their acting, of their abilities.
Right. All of the special effects, my understanding is you looked at a real technical approach, and then you kind of changed that, particularly the stuff with Sam Shepard and so forth. How did you figure out what you wanted and how to get it?
Well, we didn't know exactly how we were going to do some of the flying scenes. At the very outset, my friend George Lucas had done Star Wars, and I thought maybe we could do some of that. It's all before digital, before all the modern stuff, but stop motion the way he did worked in Star Wars and so forth. And we tried some of that with Colossal Films, and it worked on other planets, but it didn't work on this one. Because there they could put in the fault, their own planets and so forth. And it just was not, it was clunky. It was Ray Harryhausen looking, which I love that.
Yeah. You weren't making Jason and the Argonauts.
Yeah, we weren't. And I remember driving home and coming to a hill in San Francisco and just seeing a little plane going across the sky, almost like it was on a string. And I went back and I said, we're going to start over. We're going to do, this film is going to be we're going old school on this movie. And one of the clues to how we were going to do it, you'll see in the film early on when Yeager is going to ride in the X1, and somehow, I won't give it all away if you haven't seen it, he can't close the door, and he gets a part of a broomstick. It's Tom Wolfe chronicles this from the great drummer Levon Helm, who plays his sidekick Ridley, and it's sort of jerry-rigged the way they do it, the way, in a way, one of the greatest feats in aviation history was done with the ability of the American inventiveness, intuitiveness.
The improvisation. Right.
So pretty soon we were in Dogpatch in San Francisco. We were in a big factory. We had our own special, lots of offices there, and we put sort of a weight 3 or 4 stories down, a big map or picture of the high desert. And we started just throwing airplanes out of the window and following them with handheld cameras and did, various ways, and even shooting. A lot of people imitate these things of where Caleb would vibrate the cockpits and stages, where you watch the speedometers and so forth. It was, it was a way where everyone could participate. It was, and even with special effects. One guy who's long gone now, I give a shout out to, was a guy named Jordan Belson, who was an avant-garde filmmaker of the 60s who made small, kind of almost Zen, Tibetan kinds of films, beautiful art films, and he was a friend of mine. And you'll see when the sound barrier is broken, not to give too much away, but when you see the background, the sense, I wanted to make interior, the sense of what it was like to Yeager, the feeling. How do you visualize the sense, in a way, of being born into another dimension, into, and this guy, Jordan Belson, had one little room in North Beach, and he was, he had his own ways of making these effects. I never was allowed up in his room. I would describe what I wanted, and
he would go bunker down.
He was like Merlin. He would go up there, and he, after a week of work, he'd come back and show me that, or the sparks that fly around John Glenn's capsule, or some of the, when Glenn orbits the Earth, and you see the sun rising and the edge of the Earth, and amazingly, recent shots of NASA that they've released almost are duplicates of what this guy did in one little room. So the film was done with all kinds of creative people doing their best, and Caleb was wonderful at that, and I relied on all the devices that they came up with. And
I remember you told me last night there was a story on, I read somewhere you used 28 different sound people for the sound, and you told me the premiere in Washington, you had a little fun with the sound.
Well, so
that one.
The soundtrack was, we did it in San Francisco, and prior, the soundtrack Dolby was using as their show track was Invasion of the Body Snatchers. But now we were doing this movie, and I wanted to take full advantage of the way Dolby had developed. And this soundtrack for many years was the soundtrack that Dolby used in all its show reels and so forth. And the reason I mentioned Invasion of the Body Snatchers, for those who have seen it, was that there were some shrieks, pod shrieks and screams in there that were
Donald Sutherland opening his mouth and shrieking.
And we have all these sound geniuses in San Francisco, and Ben Bird did, and that shriek was a combination of many elements, pig squeals, car brakes, rumblings, thunder, it was a big mix of things. So in this film, when the rockets begin to be launched, they start with earlier rockets, and we use some of those sounds, enhance them with real rocket sounds, and as the rockets get bigger and bigger, the rumbling gets ever more big, and as you see, toward the end, it's like earth-shaking and colossal. So we had the first screening at the Kennedy Center in Washington, and everybody was in attendance because, you know, the line on the movie, which I didn't like, was, can a movie make a president? They were thinking John Glenn would be president. I wanted a movie about the quiet heroes, the men in leather jackets, about test pilots.
You wanted about the right stuff.
I wanted about the right stuff.
Right.
You know, the right stuff played 5 years in Paris, and they got it in France. And when they won World Cup in soccer, the headlines were Les Toffes des Zéros, the right stuff.
Right.
But anyway, so we come into Washington, and I'm sitting in one of the front rows, and I look down, and there's Henry Kissinger a number of seats down. So I slid out, went up to the projection room where Mark Berger, who mixed the film, was, and I said, "Turn the sound up. I want to see, when that rumbling starts, I want to see those chins of Kissinger." And sure enough, when the theater was rumbling. So that was my sound test.
That your sound test. You know, if there's any villain or anybody unpleasant in the movie, in the book, Wolf kind of portrayed the press as animals. And did you actually hire contortionists to play the press mob, or what did you come up with that?
The press was sort of a San Francisco comedy team called the Fratelli Bologna, the Bologna brothers, and they were very funny comedians they were like an insect, you know, like paparazzi, but they were popping around and doing all kinds of things. And you know, I just want to say something about that. That yes, the film does make fun of the press, and I remember at the first showing afterwards, we had a party in Washington, and Walter Cronkite was a little pissed off that we had done that. I was standing next to Yeager. He said, "Tell him to shut the fuck up." And you know, and we did, you know, have our day, and we had our day with politicians and with engineers and scientists, because it was all about that quality, that quiet, heroic quality of the right stuff. Unfortunately, in today's atmosphere, where people make fun of the press and of science and all of that, they're not doing it. They don't have the right stuff. They're not that quiet, that thing that Gary Cooper had, that Bogart had, John Wayne had. They did not brag. They did not mock the enemy. So while we had fun with that, and Tom Wolfe was a brilliant comic writer, but I just
it wasn't demeaning. It
wasn't demeaning. Yeah.
Well, I'm getting the ice on because we're running out of time. But Phil, as you look back on your career, not that it's over, but as you look back, where do you put the right stuff? And I know that's kind of like saying, "Hey, which one of your grandchildren you love the most?" But
the next one.
The next one. So that's the answer. The next one. Okay, I agree there. Well, I'll tell you what, Phil. Not only does your movie have the right stuff, you have the right stuff, and I thank goodness that you're here tonight with us, sharing with us. Ladies and gentlemen, put it together for Philip Kaufman.